Welcome to our platform series with Andre and Julian. In our last video, we talked about one method to move from a product business to a platform business by opening the doors to third parties to access your customer. And in this video, we're going to talk about the second method, which is all about connecting your customers. So let's get straight to it. What is the second way to turn a product linear business to a platform business?
You're selling a product to your customers, and you have a lot of customers, not just a few. And you find a way in which you can connect these customers together, right? Like you're going to offer something that allows these customers to connect, to communicate, to share stuff, and that adds some value. And so this actually means that the product becomes more valuable as you have more customers because they get more value from these connections. So for example, would be creating a community amongst your customers. And, as they have this community, that adds value to your product because they actually can share stuff together and maybe find a way to use your product in better ways.
So what are some examples of matured companies that has used this method?
In the US at least, some that are very well known. Intuit. So we talked about Intuit in the previous video, but this is going to be a different example. So Intuit Quickbooks is very well known. Again, same product as last time, very well known financial software product for small businesses. And an interesting way in which they turn it into a platform by connecting customers is by creating a matchmaking feature between small businesses and accountants. So let me just briefly explain. So the idea here is like Intuit, the QuickBooks product, is being used by lots of small businesses. Well, among those small businesses, there are also very small 1 to 2 to 3 people accounting firms, which are always trying, they're always trying to find new customers, i.e. other small businesses. And typically those accountants would advertise, they would advertise on Google, on Facebook, and so on. And of course, any small business, including the ones that use QuickBooks, one thing they all need is they need an accountant. And they're searching on Google and stuff like that. And at some point, Intuit realized, wait a second, we're actually in a very good position because both the accountants and the small businesses they're using our product. Like, why shouldn't we make it easier for them to find each other within our product? Obviously, makes the product more valuable. So they create a feature, a matchmaking feature, which, for lack of a better metaphor, you can think of it as like Match.com or whatever, Tinder between accountants and small businesses, complete with profiles. So the accountants have a nice profile with pictures. They enjoy long walks on the beach and other relevant or irrelevant information. And then the small businesses can search accountants by specialty, by distance, and so on. And it obviously makes the QuickBooks product more valuable because now it's not just a financial software product, but it's also a way to find accountants.
So in this example, as with all these examples where you're connecting customers, you are creating network effects in your business. So, the more customers you have, the more value everyone gets because, they can create better matches. In the case of Intuit, or in the case of building a community, they have more other members that they can communicate with and share ideas with around your product. Okay, so let me give you another example. This is more like a startup. So Steezy is providing online dance instruction. So during COVID, people couldn't go out to dance, so they're stuck at home. They want to learn new types of dance. They go to Steezy, which has very professionally filmed dance instructors in their studio, teach you how to do different types of dance, right? And that's a very popular subscription service. And as they got more people in there, they realized that they could build a community around these members where they could not only share their own dance videos, they could have competitions, right? They could have every week they have competition to, share their videos, see who's voted the best dance performance and so on. So through this type of community, they can then, add more sort of value to their product as they get more and more users, for each different type of dance.
I'd say this idea of allowing your customers to build community. There's quite a few products that have done this before. I think it makes a lot of sense in the example Julian talked about with Steezy. There's lots of other examples. So think about Tesla, for example. So Tesla has a community for its drivers in which they can go and exchange best practices or tips for certain features that are not easy to use on Tesla. There are also software products like I think Mathematica, which is software to produce like for people that write a lot of math like Julian and I do. it has a user forum, so you can, users can exchange tips, how best to use it and so on. So first of all, obviously it makes the product more valuable because, well, people can actually get more value out of it, and it creates network effects. I mean, the more people use it, the more valuable it is to each individual user.
I have this personal trainer actually on YouTube where she created a community around her where people show videos of their progress after taking her classes, and then actually having a buddy system to do the workout together so that they can lose weight together. Yeah. Right?
That's awesome. A lot of the value there comes from the fact that you have that peer pressure, to make sure you keep up with the program, right? And I'm sure that's true in the dance instruction too. Like that definitely adds value. I mean, there are many different examples of adding value by connecting customers. A different type of one is more like just for social engagement. Watching online movies, and you're using Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney Plus or whatever, right? You typically would just watch that alone in your home, but especially during COVID, you wanted to have the experience of going out to the movies, but you couldn't. They could obviously enable that by creating something like a watch party where everyone is connected together and watching exactly at the same time. And that's what they have done. Disney Plus offers that. Amazon Prime offers that. Interestingly, I don't think Netflix has offered that, but actually what happened is other companies came along and they enabled that over Netflix. You can imagine this applying very well for sports, right? Where you're watching sports events. Right. If you connect up the users who are watching together, then they can have that kind of social experience. They can share comments as they're watching live sports. So, there's lots of examples where this can add a lot of value to the underlying product.
I was educated about this company called Gans, so by some of my students. Apparently, it's a manufacturer of some very popular toys, plush toys called Webkins. And at some point, Gans created this digital universe and equipped the toys, the plush toys, with the ability to basically have a corresponding character in the digital universe. So you buy a toy, and then whatever, you have a code for your toy, and you can use that code to go and set up the character in the digital universe and interact with other people or whatever with their toys, or other customers that have bought plush toys from Gans. So it's actually pretty cool, right? I mean, it's a physical product. I like that, and they created basically like a way for their customers to interact in a digital universe. I think the name of the digital universe is something like Webkins World, or something like that. So it was very, very popular. Okay. It just made the toys that much more attractive. So you have the physical toy, but you also have the ability to go and play with the virtual avatar of your physical toy with other toy owners in this universe.
What are some examples of some maybe emerging product companies that actually can use this method?
One category of interesting application that we're starting to see more of is in liquid assets. So, there's a lot of alternative asset companies that have been set up that allow people to buy alternative assets like art or cars, like collectible cars, or wine collections and so on. And what they do is they allow people to fractionally own that. Like it's very expensive to buy a multi-million-dollar painting. So they allow like hundreds or thousands of investors to pull together, and they each get a little share of that painting or that art, that wine collection, or that, collectible car. And so once you have all these customers, that's just purely a product type service, right? You're just allowing them to get a fractional ownership of something, some asset. And those assets are quite illiquid. There's no market where you can trade them on. So an obvious thing they can do is allow their members to trade those amongst themselves, like create a secondary market where, if I bought a fraction of a famous painting and I decide, I need the money now, I can sell it to another member and so on. And that creates sort of secondary market prices and more liquidity for the users. So again, adds value to the underlying product. I'm more likely to buy the painting in the first place, more likely to come onto this platform in the first place because I have this option to trade later. And that also means it's more defensible. You have the network effects. The more people who come to this particular company to buy the assets, the more valuable it gets. So some examples would be Masterworks, which does art. And they actually already enable this secondary trading. So they're one example which has already turned it on. Other ones like Vinovest is for wine collection. They don't have that yet. I think Rally Road is for collectible cars. I don't know. I don't think they have secondary trading yet. And you can think about every different alternative asset class, right? And basically applying the same method.
Including, of course, our favorite, which is angel investing. So if you think about a platform like Angellist, which allows angel investors to invest in like early stage startups. Right now, what Angellist does, it allows these investors to invest via syndicate. So you can acquire shares, and then basically you're hoping, like you have to wait typically for several years before you have any chance of exit. So either an acquisition or IPO. And again, these are very, very liquid assets. So just like in the examples that Julian mentioned, what they could do is allow the investors to trade among themselves, like just in this like secondary market. So shares of startups.
And in that example, it's quite important that you can do that within the members, because the nature of, say, something like startup syndicate investments is there's a lot of information that has to be kept private, right? It cannot be shared with the wider public. The investors must be accredited. There's various laws and conditions around that. And so if you're doing it within the existing customer base of Angellist, these are all accredited investors that have gone through the same process, and then it's possible, which is a bit different from just creating an outside liquid marketplace where these things are traded, which would be much more difficult and may not actually be legal.
Yeah, which speaks to the value of like how valuable such an add-on would be. So this idea of like connecting customers by allowing them to trade these assets in the secondary market.
Yeah, I actually have one customer who is actually providing custodian services or fund management services to fund managers and then connecting to investors. So it's a perfect example where they manage multiple stakeholders, which is, again, fund managers, stakeholders, investors, lawyers, accountants, as part of the process, maybe to create a possible platform where they could have a lot of different funds and actually connect investors, across, the different funds itself, and also possibly a secondary market, maybe.
Yes.
These things are not easy to set up, right? Because, Angellist hasn't done that yet. Most of these companies have not added that yet, because doing that kind of secondary trade, there's a lot of legal stuff that must be sorted out first.
Which is why they are the perfect vehicle to do it, because that's what they do, sorting the compliance, the legal, the accountancy, the process, the custodian, and also the financial license and that they need to have in order to actually provide that custodian service. Is probably the barrier to entry.
Absolutely. And if you can imagine, like Angellist does this, right? Like right now, there are other ways you can invest in startups. There are competing companies to Angellist. They have different models, right? But if Angellist is the only one that can allow you to trade before IPO or before the company's bought, then that could be a very attractive feature for investors, that they know that when they're on there, they have that liquidity within the Angellist system. And the more other investors there are on Angellist, the more valuable is that secondary market. And so it becomes a very defensible moat for Angellist.
Aren't the two of you like on Angellist actually? So why are you not suggesting making that?
We actually have suggested it to them, and they did say they're looking at something like this. So.
We would certainly benefit from it for sure.
I'm not so sure, Andrei. I'm not so sure.
Offload your shares. Offload the one that you think are not executing.
You might sell early. One of the benefits of angel investing is you're locked in, so you can't trade, you can't buy and sell. When you're afraid that you might whims, now's the time to sell, and then it goes up another 100x.
You realize that your expectation of the founders, that he's not executing on what he's saying, so you better exit and sell. If you know of any platform companies that also could use this and as another side to add on.
Angellist actually fits that very well. So because Angellist, in fact, is already a platform company. So they connect startups with investors. And what we're talking about here is to basically generate extra network effects by facilitating connections between investors as well. So not just between investors and startups.
I have one company which is called Envato. They are a Melbourne-based global company from Australia. They started with a marketplace for digital assets, so allow people to buy and sell digital assets, so creative assets from authors, they say. And then they started having products that they sell to companies, which is like unlimited subscription to have those digital assets. And then they also have a product to the designer of using tutorials and tools to create digital assets. And now they are connecting as a matchmaker between the designers and the companies by allowing those companies to hire the designers or if they are looking for designers. So that's another way where they are matchmaking between their customers. They recently crossed 1 billion in community earnings in 2020. That's quite a lot. So what are some of the prerequisites for companies to use this method?
I mean, maybe another way to frame it would be, how do you know that your product or your service is a good candidate for doing exactly what we've been describing? And I mean, the way we would typically recommend to companies that we work with, or the way we do it ourselves when we look at startups, is to ask a series of questions to figure out if there's any way or if any reason to get your customers to interact. So we can go through the list of questions, right? So the first question we'd ask would be something like, is the product or the service that you're selling, is there some complexity that warrants, some customers talking to other customers to find out how to use it? So the example we had in mind here is that we mentioned earlier with, more complex software products like Mathematica, where some users, because they have experience, they can teach new users, some tricks or, some shortcuts for how to use the product. So this kind of question is designed to get at that. Like, is there any reason, or is there any scope for some users to teach or to give advice to other users? A second question would be, which is kind of related, is there any way for some users, for some segment of your users, to provide complementary services to other users and complementary to your product? So the good example here is Intuit with the accountants and the small businesses. So again, small businesses, they love QuickBooks because it makes it easy for them to run their business. Now they love it even more because it also allows them to find an accountant that they like. So in retrospect, this just seems like very obvious, right? I mean, providing accounting services is a very obvious and very clear complement to using a product like QuickBooks.
So I guess another question you could ask is there scope for a social interaction between your customers, right? Obviously, if it's business customers, that may not be so relevant, but especially for consumer-based products, there's often scope for some kind of social interaction. And obviously the Netflix, Disney Plus example would be one where, it's not just watching a movie by yourself, but they want to do it socially. And likewise for your gym example or the dance example with Steezy, these are all good examples of providing that sort of social interaction. And then the last one would be the last thing we'd ask as well, is it that you have an asset that's a liquid that your customers are buying? And there, we've given all the examples like we mentioned with Angellist and Masterworks.
The shared experience is better together. I think that's what it's actually really about. Is this something where the shared experience of consuming this product or service could be better together?
Yeah, so I think that's what we put on with that's what we're trying to get at with the first question, right? Like, is there any reason, like, for some users to teach other users? The social stuff is a bit different, right? I mean, it's basically it's exactly this. It's like social. It's typically between consumers. It's one way to think about it, is this product better if this product or service, is it better if it's enjoyed by different users at the same time, if they can share that?
If it's consumed together, right? Like
if it's consumed together, yeah.
The one is like teaching each other, which is the first example, but there's obviously some overlap. If you think about dance, it could be that users are teaching each other stuff, or it could be they just want to do it together because it's more fun.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you can always, like, some users may say, oh, like, this is a good way to figure out this dance move, but at the same time, it's also like a way to just share the experience.
What would be some benefits of this method?
So, I mean, the obvious one that we've already talked about a lot, which is just creating the network effects, which makes the underlying product more valuable, makes it much more sticky, so customers are more likely to stay with you and not go to competitors. So that's sort of the most obvious benefit. But sometimes you may actually create some kind of marketplace, like the Intuit example, where you can actually monetize it, right? Because the users are paying money to another set of customers, and you can actually get a share of that revenue.
It's like for every one of these, like in all of these videos about how to turn products into platforms, the primary reason, sort of the true north, is we're going to try to create some network effects in order to make the product stickier. And beyond that, there might be some additional benefits, but the network effect is always sort of the main motive.
So what are some of the potential pitfalls and trade-offs?
If it's community or connecting the customers together, there could be some cost of actually creating that, right? Like you've got to create forums and you've got to monitor those. You've got to then deal with potentially users who are creating trouble for other users. Like when you're connecting consumers that are supposed to increase the experience and make, better for everyone, but some users may actually not do that, right? They might actually annoy everyone else, and then you've got to moderate that. You've got to sometimes even kick them out, and so and related to that, then you start to get blamed for any problems that occur when these customers are interacting.
Right. So there's basically, it's the pragmatic, just to emphasize, there's a pragmatic aspect, which, let me use the example, the Gantz example with the toys, right? I mean, in some sense, it's not obvious that creating a parallel universe for the toys adds much value. It turned out that it did, right? But it's certainly, it's a significant cost for this toy company to also now create and manage a digital universe. Turns out it worked really well. And then the second one Julian mentioned is the being blamed for things that are outside of your control.
I mean, if you think about the example of the illiquid assets, like the Angellist secondary market, obviously a lot of costs of setting it up. I'd say the cost of creating that is probably the biggest barrier, just from all the compliance and legal issues.
And making sure the transactions are the asset holders who they say they are, and like transferring ownership is not trivial.
Information privacy and so on with respect to information that's already been shared with one party, and whether they can share that with a new party that's buying the asset.
So if you have a product and you do not know which method to use, and if this method is right for you, maybe you would like to send us your question, and we might pick your product as an example to walk through how you would turn that into a platform.
I should have like banner ads, like call me with your products and I'll turn them into platforms in 90 seconds or less.
Please call 1-800-Andre. What are some of the examples that it has turned into a disaster when they try to matchmake their customers?
I don't know about disaster, but certainly certainly not very successful and extremely entertaining for everyone else. So remember how we said one of the ways in which you can turn your product into a platform by facilitating interactions between your customers is to generate social interactions. Well, one very salient type of social interaction is obviously dating. And you will not be shocked to learn that some companies have thought it might be a good idea to allow their customers, the customers of their products, to date each other. So there's some, or at least to flirt with one another. So I think we have two examples that are pretty funny. The first one is Samsung. So Samsung sells many products, but it also sells fridges. And one day it created this product, which you can actually go look up. So it created this concept called refrigerator dating. And essentially, if I got it right, they have an app which basically allows people to take pictures of the content of their fridges. And there's an app where they can match, basically, I guess they can browse other people of the opposite sex, if they're heterosexual, to look for people whose fridge content matches their preferences. And based on that, to start basically dating. I think it was a service, by the way, this was not widely available. I think it was available in Sweden or Germany or something like that. And you can I think you can still go look it up. It's like refrigerating.com.
Interesting thing is they made quite a big fanfare about its introduction. They took it like it was supposed to be this big new thing they're doing, like they're creating this social network on fridges, basically.
Yes.
Or, I'm not quite social, more than a social network, a dating site on fridges, on their fridges.
I find it interesting.
Not surprisingly, it hasn't quite worked out.
But I find it interesting why specifically for the Swedish market and the German market. From that perspective, maybe there's something about the country characteristic that suits this. You know what I mean? I used to live in Germany.
And yes, it didn't work out, or at least it doesn't seem to be a very popular service. I mean, you can definitely look it up. There's articles written about this, and it's very recent. It's 2019, 2020, I think. The other one in the same vein was Virgin I think Virgin Atlantic, Sir Richard Branson's airline company. So they have these we call like in-flight software systems where you can go order drinks. And at some point they decided a great feature to add would be something called the in-flight flirting system. So the idea here would be like, if you see a passenger that you find attractive at a different seat, you can basically use the in-flight flirting system to order them a drink, and I think to send them a message. And again, they did this for a while, and not surprisingly, at some point someone did something inappropriate, and of course it led to a sexual harassment lawsuit. And I think in the end, Virgin Atlantic discontinued the in-flight flirting system.
So this is a good example of what I was talking about with, the downside, that you might get some bad actors on there that are going to misuse the service and, upset other users, and then you get blamed for it. And, that probably not only they had to remove it, but they probably quite embarrassingly, had to deal with these lawsuits and, bad for their reputation and brand.
I guess this is the same thing where, we talk about the whole platform thing. When you're trying to have that community, itself, you need to have the governance to regulate the interactions, because you're really opening up again to both sides, and you don't want to start this service without thinking about how you're going to regulate the interactions and the interaction and the connection.
Yeah, I think that's the part. I mean, it's very easy to make fun of these examples, but on a more serious note, I mean, you can see why they might try that. Presumably, both Samsung and Virgin. I mean, I can see why they might, like, some reasonable people may sit around the room and actually give the go-ahead to projects like this. I mean, it's not entirely silly, right? I mean, you can say, well, maybe it's like, it'll make us appear cool, like it's a fun marketing gimmick. We get all of that. But I think it's very important to realize that there's this like clear downside, which is when you go from service to platform, you are now basically no longer in full control, because, people are basically going to do whatever they want, to some extent, and you're the one responsible. So you have to ask yourself, like, do you really want to be in the business of governing this kind of interactions, or is it better to stick to doing what you do, which is selling products and services? Now, in some cases, it's absolutely worth going ahead and creating these interactions. But I think the key message here is, when you do that, governance is very important. So you want to make sure that there's no abuses, or if there are abuses, people are punished swiftly, and the user experience doesn't suffer too much.
I think it was a cool idea from a fridge perspective. But I just think that maybe Samsung should better connecting people because of what they install on their phone as apps. That might be a better compatibility between people,
right,
instead of what's in the fridge.
It's very easy. Like, I think everyone can make fun of Samsung, but I think the more interesting questions, exactly what Josephine just pointed out, and I actually do this with students and say, okay, so everyone agrees that, using the fridge as a medium for dating may sound a little bit silly, but let's think about what other products or services might actually be decent channels for this, like for better candidates for this. And so I don't know about the phone, but certainly, for example, services like Kindle or Netflix, basically, like, you can think about those services adding something similar, i.e. matching their users based on, say, so for dating purposes, based on their book preferences or movie preferences, or let's say, I don't know, if it's Spotify, it would be like music preferences. So it's not entirely silly. I mean, you can conceivably imagine at least one or two of these companies adding a service like that.
And that actually could be something that they build on after already connecting the customers in the ways that we've talked about. Like Netflix, they build a watch party service. And then on top of that, people are watching together and they have similar preferences. They enable ways for them to communicate. And sort of the next step would be enable them to match and date, right? Like, it's just a very natural extension of that kind of service if they wanted to go down that line. And similarly for Steezy and Dance, right? Like, that's a natural way where people are interacting in a way that would, could be used to then go on and offer sort of a matching or a dating service.
When you have multiple products, sometimes it's also about seeing whether there's a connection point between the customers if you have a product portfolio between the products.
That's right. So it could be the same product, or it could be connecting customers across your different products.
Okay, this is an audience question. So a lot of founders are confused between the term virality and network effects. Could you please clarify what is the difference?
It's not just the founders that are confused. Actually, we find a lot of investors are confused. There's a lot of mixing of these two terms, right? Like everywhere. And they are very distinct concepts. So virality is really just the fact that you're sharing information. So, product goes viral is because, customers are sharing with other customers, right? And it doesn't mean that the product's getting better as you add more customers. It's just that more people know about it. And with network effects, remember the definition is the product gets better as you have more customers, right? And so that's a very key distinction.
What I would add also, another way to sort of drive home this point is pretty much with clever marketing and social media, pretty much any product can go viral. I mean, if you conduct a clever marketing campaign, put it on Twitter, people share it with each other, you can take like, I don't know, shoes, like any boring product, and you can, at least in theory, you can make it go viral. But again, not every product has network effects, right? I mean, the fact that it goes viral just simply means people, like a lot of people find out about it because, you conduct a very clever marketing campaign and people are incentivized to tell each other about it. That's great. Network effects is, it's actually a little bit more difficult. It has this requirement that actually the value of the product is higher when more people use it. So an interesting observation is like the products that do have network effects, there's some inherent virality. Like let's say if I join a new social network, I have every incentive to tell all my friends about it because I'd prefer that my friends join the same social network so I can interact with them. But it doesn't go the other way again. Like a lot of products can go viral, but without having any network effects.
And that's probably why these two concepts do get confused, because when they do have clear direct network effects, like something like Facebook, it has a very strong network effect. The more people on there, the more valuable it is for those users. It also tends to have that virality feature, right? That people share it because they want to tell their friends and their relatives to get on Facebook so that they can connect with them. So, because of the network effect, they share it. And so it has virality as well. And so it sort of, has both features, and that's why people get confused. But in terms of like, from a business point of view, you might ask which one's better. Is it better to have virality or network effects? And like if you're trying to get a product off the ground, virality is great, right? Like having a product go viral is the best type of distribution, right? You have to advertise it, just the product takes off. So that's great for getting going, but it doesn't provide you any long run defensibility, right? Like it might go viral, does really well, and then other people copy it, and then you're back to competing aggressively with tons of competitors. Versus if you had network effect, maybe it's very hard to get going. But once you get it to some point where you have a lot of users, it's very valuable, and it's very hard for anyone to compete because they don't have any users and they can't offer that value.
Do you have any example to illustrate the difference? Yeah, Clubhouse. What do you think about, does that virality and network effects?
That has
both. Yeah, you want to
people were sharing it. People were sharing it like wildly. That was very viral.
Yes.
They made it very viral deliberately through their marketing strategies.
Yeah.
Made it exclusive, and you had the only way you could get on there is that someone else shared it with you, and all these famous people are on there, so everyone's talking about it. So that's the virality part.
Yes.
And then the network effects, obviously, the more people on there, the more interesting, different rooms you can go into and listen to different conversations. And so the more people there, the more variety of things to listen to, and the more valuable it becomes.
What do you think of the business model, and what do you think of the business?
Our problem with that business is, while it has network effects, its switching costs are extremely low. And basically, if I want to set up a competitor, and a bunch of companies have, right? Like Twitter has introduced a competing product, Facebook's introducing competing product. They're all, there's a bunch of competitors already. Why do I have to stick with Clubhouse? I'll just go to wherever there's an interesting conversation and listen to that. And that it's a bit like Zoom and other video, conferencing services. Like we can start on anything. Wherever the interesting hosts are, that's where I will go. And so there's nothing like tying everyone to Clubhouse. It has the advantage, like everyone knows about it. So there's some benefit, but it's not a very strong defensible position.
So actually, it has no barrier to entry. It has no defensibility itself. It has no unfair advantage, but it has great virality in the beginning of how they started, isn't it?
Make sure we don't get confused. So Clubhouse definitely has both. So they have network effects and they have virality. I think the point we're making is like in this particular case, the network effects are not very defensible, because you can take, because there are others. But if the question is like, this is not an illustration of the difference between virality and network effects.
And that has to do with the fact that switching costs are very low, that people can move around these things without being tied to one or the other, right?
So the more important thing is really about finally actually having those defensibility itself, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why having this
That depends on the type of network effects and the exact, we have to go into the features of the network effects, and not all network effects are equal. There are different types of network effects, and in this case, you could say, well, the main network effect is everyone sort of goes to Clubhouse because they know about it. But think about Twitter and Facebook. They have massive audiences already. They have, massive number of users, and everyone knows about them as well. So it's very easy for them to provide the same service, and everyone can just go there. It's a similar thing to Zoom, like look at who Zoom is, sort of an independent company that sprung up, and then there's a bunch of existing companies with large audiences or large numbers of users that copied the same features and offer similar service. Microsoft Teams, Google Hangouts, and whatever, right? Like Google Meet.
Except that Zoom is a lot more successful, and that again, there's another factor there, which is like technologically, it's just like they solved the problem. I mean, they did some technological things better than everyone else.
Yeah, and related to that, with Zoom, it's much more defensible in the sense that there are setup costs, right? There are switching costs.
Right. Remember, because the Clubhouse is just audio, right? So in some sense, like the technology is actually pretty simple. Like it's not very complicated.
Yeah, actually, and the reason why I brought this up is also because I find a lot of startup, when they are thinking about growth, a lot of time they only think about growth, but they don't really think about what is the defensibility and how are we going to stay in business and what is the unfair advantage. True. And they don't spend enough time really thinking through it. And I always think that unless you know what it is, don't scale so fast. You know what I mean? It's like you can grow fast as much as you can grow, is as much as, and if there is money to be made, you are going to have competition. That is for sure. And if I have $5 million, $10 million to pump into another company to compete with you, how are you going to make sure that you're going to be around still, when the market itself is going to be hot? So I guess, that is probably one example to illustrate the point where, figure out your defensibility as well.
And there's lots of examples of fads, right? Like new products that are very cool and everyone's using, especially with kids, and then suddenly they go viral. Everyone tells everyone else to use this product, but then there's like 100 competitors offering exactly the same thing, producing it from China at a fraction of the cost, and they're not defensible. So
exactly. Coming out in our next video, we will share another method to move from product to platform, which is all about reaching your customer's customer. If you know someone who needs to hear this, remember to share them so that this video will go viral. So be sure to subscribe, follow, like, and send us your questions.